What should be done to avoid dust? And do not come to this. Anyone who travels through the Valencian community or flies over it from the air will be able to verify the bleak panorama in which the east of Spain finds itself. In the summer of 2019, we suffered a fire that perfectly shows how insufficient the current resources we have are, and at the same time the good work carried out by the firefighting units given the limited resources available to them. It began on July the 15th, 2019, at about 2 in the afternoon, on a level 2 pre-emergency day, which is high risk. Only 2 fire lorries came at first, and they could not enter the ravine where the fire had originated due to the high risk involved.
Bon dia, amics. Avui sí que és un dia de les pitjors que puguem tindre en el poble de Beneixama. La Solana està en pleno. És una ratonera i no poden accedir ahí els bomberos. N'hi ha que fer tot el que puguem entre tots per cridar a tota la governació civil i a tota la gent que coneguem i que puguem per poder que ens envien lo antes possible mitjans aèries, o si no és impossible accedir ahí. És una ratonera, està tot ple, n'hi ha tanta marea ahí està dalt de la caleta del Vero, està tot ja completament ja sacs. No n'hi ha ningú mig ara en aquests moments actuant, són les 2:30, no n'hi ha ningú mig, tots els bomberos que acaben d'arribar, acaba d'arribar jo també, les dos de bomberos i les forestals, ¿vale? Intenteu cridar a tots els contactes que pugueu, per favor, i anem a coordinar-vos tots per en seguida que puguem entrar a començar així a apagar foc, o si no ens quedem sense Solana, Un abraç, amics, i estigueu atentos.
But no aerial resources came at first. If at that time a flow of 20 liters per second had begun to pour without stopping, when the fire would not have a perimeter of more than 100 meters, that fire would surely have gone out at that time. But no aerial resources came. The fire got out of control, and in the following half hour it moved in a southeasterly direction, burning 4 kilometers of mountain. fire front stopped when entering olive grove areas. It did not spread to the south as there were cultivated fields. And the northern flank managed to stabilize itself, thanks to the existence of firewalls and the aerial resources that finally did come. At 6 in the afternoon, the wind turned to the southeast. The fire did not spread to the north because that flank was already stabilized, but it did spread a little to the west. Around 10 p.m., 8 hours after the start, the fire was also controlled on that flank. The result was 835 hectares burned. For greater calamity, in September of that same year, a violent storm discharged about 200 liters per square meter or more over the area in one night, eroding the entire mountain range, dragging huge amounts of fertile soil and leaving the rock bare. This is the future that awaits the Spanish Southeast if every year we continue adding 40 or 50,000 new hectares of calcined forest or more. Something is wrong, not the professionalism of the staff who fight the fire, who do a magnificent job giving the resources at their disposal. The real problem is that these resources, as awesome as the numbers may seem, are totally insufficient to extinguish the fires. So, what resources are necessary to put a forest fire out? A fire is a chemical reaction. If the wood dries and gets hot enough, its cellulose molecules will decompose and release combustible gases such as carbon monoxide and hydrogen, which, when in contact with an oxidizing gas, oxygen, will produce the reaction. This reaction releases more heat than is needed to produce it. In this case, the energy needed to split the cellulose into fuel gases. And this means that the reaction is maintained as long as there is no lack of any of the elements that maintain it: wood, oxygen, or heat. So, to extinguish a fire, you have to deprive it of some of the elements that feed it. A fire can be extinguished if we deprive it of oxygen. This is what we do when, if a pan catches fire, we react quickly and cover it with a lid. Needless to say, in an open space like the bush, you can't deprive the fuel of oxygen. Fire can be deprived of the material that originates combustible gases, wood. This is achieved by opening firewalls, which have proven effective in many situations, especially when a fire is already out of control. Many times the only hope is to hope that when it reaches a fire break, it will be extinguished, or at least reduced in intensity enough to be able to put it out completely. But the most direct way to put a fire out is to deprive it of the heat that fuels the chemical reaction. To put out a fire, you have to cool it faster than it gives off that heat. If the fire of this bonfire gives off heat with a power of 6 megawatts, we need to cool it at least with a power of 6 megawatts. If this is achieved, the fire will be extinguished. So the resources of firefighting must achieve that. It is necessary to pour a continuous flow of water intense enough to cancel the excess energy that is released in the chemical reaction that is the fire, so that this reaction does not continue to occur, and then the fire will go out. Let's now see the cooling power of water. A liter of water at 15 degrees Celsius needs 85 kilocalories to raise its temperature to 100 degrees. 1 kilocalorie for each degree that we want to raise the temperature of the liter of water. And then it takes an additional 538 kilocalories to turn that liter of water into steam. In total, 623 kilocalories of cooling power, which converted to kilojoules is 2608 kilojoules. Therefore, a flow of 1 liter per second will provide about 2600 kilojoules per second, which is 2600 kilowatts of power, which converted to megawatts will be 2.6 megawatts. So, a flow rate of 10 liters per second will provide 26 megawatts of cooling power. This if all the poured water turns into steam. Let's assume that not all water poured on the fire evaporates. If we consider that only 60% of the discharge flow evaporates, that flow of 10 liters per second will still provide about 15 megawatts of cooling power. But we can also assume that the more intense a fire is, the greater the percentage of water that evaporates when poured on it, and therefore the efficiency of those 10 liters per second is closer to those 26 megawatts. The power of the flames in a fire depends on many factors, such as the thickness of the vegetation, the wind of the slope, but in many moments it will not have a power greater than 15 megawatts per meter of fire front, especially if you act before the fire acquires great dimensions. If a surface fire has a power of more than 3 megawatts per meter of fire front, it can spread to the treetops and have powers of 10 megawatts or more per meter of fire front. It is true that a fire can have powers of 100 megawatts per meter or more, but in many situations this will not be the case. So, to put out a fire you need to pour water without interruptions on the fire front with a flow rate that cancels those powers. As long as we do not have an infrastructure capable of providing these flows of water, we will not be able to turn it off. That is the only reality, and also, if possible, no later than half an hour after the fire breaks out, to act before it reaches larger dimensions. As I have shown you before, in almost 80% of cases the place of the fire is reached before half an hour has passed since it is declared. But we are not able to provide those water flows from that moment on. Does anyone believe that the helicopter that is going to unload in this image and that it is going to take at least 10 minutes to return or to be relieved by another is going to be able to put that fire out? A seaplane can dump more water, but it will have to return to the base or a reservoir to recharge so it can dump again. How long will it take to return or be relieved? Half an hour? Will he be able to extinguish the entire lane of fire with a single discharge? Because if not, in that half hour the fire will continue to spread along the flanks. I am not criticizing the professionals who work on firefighting, who do too much for the resources at their disposal. I criticize the lack of resources. So, what resources are needed? How do you manage to pour those flows of water uninterruptedly that I mentioned before? To begin with, a network of high-altitude water reservoirs separated by a maximum of 10 kilometers from each other is needed. This is not a problem, and in fact, many Alicante mountains already have them, and at a shorter distance. They usually have a capacity of about 200,000 liters. But the most important thing is that a fleet of high-capacity helicopters is needed, which in turn pours a flow using water cannons equal to the power given off by the fire. The best model, in my opinion, would be the Sikorsky S-64 Skycrane, which is capable of carrying 9,000 liters of water. A reservoir of the above would allow it to make about 20 recharges. The way of acting should be as follows. A fire breaks out in a mountain range. The alarm is raised and the first helicopter departs from the nearest base and takes half an hour to arrive. Find the most suitable point to attack the fire and start pouring that water flow of 10 liters per second. As it takes 9,000 liters, it will last 15 minutes. After those 15 minutes, a second helicopter must have arrived in the area to take over, and then the first helicopter will have 15 minutes to travel to the nearest reservoir, recharge, and return to the point of the fire, where it will take over from the second helicopter. In this way, only with 2 helicopters and 50-minute shifts can an uninterrupted flow of 10 liters per second be poured onto the fire. That is, a cooling power of 15 megawatts can be provided, and that assuming that only the 60% of the water discharge is used. This flow should be enough to put fires out with a power per meter of fire front of the same intensity. And the intensity of a fire spreading through the treetops may not exceed that value at many times, or that it is a fire in a scrub area, which will surely have less power per meter of fire front. Suppose 3 helicopters come. In that case, the situation would improve in one of 2 ways. The time interval for recharging could be extended to 30 minutes from the end of the download. Or the discharged water flow could be doubled, 20 liters per second, so the cooling power would also double, 30 megawatts. As before, assuming that only 60% of the discharged water is used, which could be more. Remember that the more intense a fire is, the greater the percentage of water that evaporates when poured on it. So, with this flow rate, if all the water poured on the fire were evaporated, fires with intensities of up to 50 megawatts per meter could be extinguished. During that flow, the unloading time would be 7.5 minutes. But the helicopters, if there were 3, could still have 50 minutes to recharge. 30 Sikorsky S-64 helicopters, or a model with the same capabilities, distributed throughout the peninsula, the Balearic Islands and the Canary Islands, would make it possible to deal with many fires in the manner I have just described. And how much would all that cost? I admit I don't know how much a Sikorsky S-64 costs. Let's say it costs about $40 million. That would make $1.2 billion. Expensive? I don't think so. The high-speed railway from Madrid to Albacete and Valencia cost 5,900 million euros. And this is just one of the many public works that have been carried out in Spain in recent years. Or put another way, Spain bought 70 Eurofighter combat aircraft a few years ago, whose price is estimated at 90 million euros each. If we can buy and hold one thing, we can buy and hold the other. It is true that the Mediterranean forest can recover after a fire, but it takes decades. Whether or not a forest recovers can vary greatly from one area to another. I have not seen many burned areas recover, if by recovery we mean that the land develops scrap of certain size, or a certain density of trees. Of course, there will always be scrubland. This is an image of the Sierra de Mariola, burned in 1994. After 28 years, where is the forest? In addition, many mountains do not recover because they suffered a second fire in less than 20 years. This is the Sierra de Bocairente, burned in 1994 and 2010. And this is how it is now. A lot of bushes, but not a single tree. As long as the interval between fires is less than the time it takes for a forest to recover, it will never recover. I mean, if a mountain needs 30 years to recover and it burns every 20, it will never regenerate. And with the current rate of fires that we have in Spain, can anyone assert that the mountains that have already been burned once will not suffer another fire in the next 20 years? It's only a matter of time before all the mountains are burned. I am not saying that all the fires can be put out with the resources I propose, of course, nor that 30 helicopters like this could be enough. But many more fires could be extinguished and much sooner than those that can be extinguished with the resources we have now. But to achieve that, we have to spend much more money than we currently dedicate. And nothing more. I leave you a link to a spectacular video of how a Sikorsky manages to load 9,000 liters in a minute and a half, move to the place of a fire in a few minutes, and unload. That's all.